As I warmed into a steady pace while out jogging, so many thoughts I had pondered over recently seemed to race into my mind, seeking to be resolved with every step I took. The lockdown being one of them. With most people being cooped up indoors for a few days, it was absolutely necessary to go jogging. The weather was perfect. It was a warm and sunny morning, and getting a bit of exercise is always a great way to take a breather from being cooped up indoors. Typical with early spring season, you could clearly see the trees blooming and hear the birds chirping away happily. The roads were unusually clear of both vehicles and people. From a distance, you could just about see one or two people either on a run or walking their dogs. The scene felt like it had jumped right out of a lifestyle magazine or a fairy tale movie. In the distance, I heard a man approaching from the opposite side of me, firmly telling his probably 9-year-old daughter to stay on the opposite side of the path away from me. As they got closer, they practically ran into the grass to get past me at breakneck speeds. Under normal circumstances, it would have been most offensive. But in this case, I was equally as grateful that they kept their distance as a safety measure. And at that very moment, like an unguarded punch to the gut, today's reality hit home even harder. Was this what life had now become? At this point, my footfalls pounded the pavement in time, as with the question I now pondered. My mind tried to filter through all the tales of doom that flooded in from news channels and social media daily while being on lockdown, most of which made no logical sense. In the face of all the tsunami of information, one thing was certain, and it was my renewed respect and gratitude for the healthcare workers the world over. First responders, doctors, the police, members of the military, and so many others who formed the first line of defense for all of us against the global pandemic COVID-19. As I celebrated their efforts and praised their bravery and dedication to preserving life, my next question then became, is the church now redundant and no longer relevant in the world today? Suddenly, my mind became instantly flooded with memories of some of the healing crusades of Benny Hinn, and a particular crusade I recently watched of Oral Roberts, where he was speaking to a young man who had a severe stutter. As he prayed and spoke with this young man, he got healed. Immediately, my mind took a turn to the book God's Generals, and I started to think on some of these generals like John G. Lake, who placed a sample of a killer virus on his hand and it died on contact with him. I found a new spring in my steps, inspired by Smith Wigglesworth, the homegrown British evangelist, known for his rugged faith and belief in God, who is believed to have slapped a goiter with his Bible and it fell to the floor. Smith had also once returned home to hear of his wife's death. With his deep faith, he turned to God, refusing to accept her death, and brought her back to life, only to let her go later upon her request, as heaven was so glorious that she would rather return. Finally, I thought of the teachings of Christ and his apostles about the laying of hands on the sick and they recovered, and not laying of hands on the sick after they had recovered. Instantly, I heard my mind counter my thoughts with, but social distancing? As I continued on my jog, I realized that it was not just enough to ask these questions and remain puzzled, since there would be many like me who would have had similar questions and thoughts. So rather than leaving myself with unanswered questions, I thought it wise to put to practice the science of digging deep from within. And that meant tapping into the spirit that was in me to draw some answers that could make a significant difference to the world's current situation. For starters, The reality of the day is that darkness abounds, and we have to recognize and acknowledge this. The emergence of COVID-19 was a crisis that could not be avoided, and this in turn has led to consistent theft of our peace, a tidal wave of fear, increased death of citizens by the virus, and erosion of global economies. We need to accept that no matter what, the world will be changed forever. However, what that change looks like, good or bad, is down to our individual as well as collective responses. Today we have a choice to either respond with life or continually proclaim death. Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs 23:7. What we think is what we become. Scriptures say, "Let the weak say I am strong." We can all choose to stay. I know what's going on, but as for me and my household, we will be fine. Secondly, unless we choose to be irrelevant, the church is what the world needs, not as a building we go to, but as a people who exhibit the life of Christ. In recent times, the church has been so stuck in gathering for its own glory, doing things in its own strength, gathering accolades based on its own ideological revelations, and has neglected the primary objectives of being led by the presence of God and functioning in the communion and power of the Holy Spirit. Moses said, "If your presence doesn't go with me, please don't let us move from here." Exodus 33:15. The resultant effect of all this is that the practical application of faith in day-to-day living has become an alien concept. To further support this, I marvel at ministers and people who spend useful time and energy spreading the 5G propaganda, creating suspicion which could lead to endangerment of life. My question is, how does this help? It's back to age-old questions of how does arguing about the ethnicity of Christ instead of declaring his finished work make the human race better? A practical illustration from the scriptures is at the Passover. The children of Israel were instructed to put the blood of the lamb on their lintels and stay quarantined to avoid death. So for us today, it would be similar. Staying at home and stay safe. Use this period of isolation to seek a priority personal relationship with Christ and hiding in His Word and name rather than being afraid of death. Let us use this period to dig deep. Discover you and your purpose for living every day. Harness and develop your ideas. Develop a plan to address the gaps of that plan, with a mindset that you are the answer the world is waiting for. After all, the world is awaiting the manifestation of the sons of God. Finally, be encouraged as a collective to earnestly pray for those on the front line, especially those who are believers, that the power and presence of God be with them as they work, not only to keep them safe, but place them in the dominion as a point of contact between God and the sick. Can you imagine how awesome it would be to hear in the news about the miraculous healing working of God in this season? Imagine if stories flood the media of how patients that get admitted into particular wards were met by a team of faith-filled doctors who went about healing the sick as they treated their patients. Imagine the headlines reading as such: healing frontline staff, delivering on 100% mortality and recovery rate with a one-day turnaround time. Say miracle? Healing has come for COVID-19. Oh, that would be glorious. And yes, the world will definitely know that Jesus is Lord over all things and the same yesterday, today, and forever. So, in summary, this season has demonstrated that the world is in desperate need of hope and good news. And as prescribed in John 1:4-5, the life of Christ is the light of men that causes darkness that's covering our world to flee. In truth, darkness has never been able to consume, absorb, or destroy this light, and it will not start now. So this season, Let's make up our minds to shine in whichever way God leads us, either in business, at work, or wherever, to see and bring healing, hope, and life back to our world. Wherever you are today, let me challenge you to declare God's healing in prayers every day. Reach out and share messages of hope and post testimonies of good news of what God is doing so we can fill the world with light as we have been designed to do. Stay blessed.